For the longest time, it felt completely impossible to quit my addictions. I spent 20 of my 35 years trying to run away from life, only to find myself back at square one having to face the very things that I was always trying to escape from. It wasn't until I got to the root of why I had addictions in the first place that I was finally able to overcome their tight grip. If you're currently struggling with addiction of any kind, my hope is that by the end of this video, you have a better understanding as to why you have addictions in the first place, ideas on how to overcome them, and that you feel empowered to finally let them go once and for all. Before we dive into this video, I do want to add a quick disclaimer that I will be discussing highly sensitive topics, including abuse, abortion, death threats, suicide, and sexual assault. So if you're easily triggered by any of those topics, I would not recommend watching this video. During my recovery journey, I came across a quote by Dr. Gabor Mate that really stuck with me. He said, "Addiction isn't the problem. It's a symptom of unresolved trauma." In order to share my experience in overcoming all of my addictions, I first need to share the root of what caused me to become an addict in the first place. Because it wasn't until I healed through the trauma of these experiences that I finally became free after 20 years of struggling. After my parents got divorced when I was 12, they essentially switched roles with me. Both of them digressed back into teenagers, and I wound up parenting them and raising myself. I was constantly taking on all of their adult responsibilities and emotional baggage, while simultaneously suppressing my own needs and emotional experience through all of the extreme changes that were taking place. I went from a kid who wasn't allowed to have a childhood to an adult taking care of the household overnight. Around the time I turned 15, the summer between freshman and sophomore year, I started drinking alcohol and sneaking out of the house late at night to ride my bike through the countryside to meet up and smoke weed with my friends. By the time the school year started, I was indulging on a daily basis. I couldn't wait to smoke a bowl before the bus picked me up and drink vodka in my Snapple during the first 3 classes of the day. I'd stare at the clock, anticipating going home so I could get high, watch TV, and pick out on pizza bagels before doing house chores and making dinner for my dad and grandma. I was constantly lying and covering my tracks because my dad drilled it in my head that if I ever did anything he didn't approve of, that he would kill me. And if you watch chapter 5 of this series, then you already know that my mother planted that original seed when I was just a small child, and now my father was watering it, perpetuating the same fear and shame narrative in order to control me. All this resulted in was making me feel like I could never go to him whenever I was in trouble, which trained me to get better at hiding things and being extremely secretive. When I was 16 and halfway through my junior year, I accidentally got pregnant by my high school boyfriend, who ended up breaking up with me as soon as I told him the news. I knew that I wasn't in any position to bring a child into the world, nor did I want them to grow up in the same circumstances that I was already in, so I decided to get an abortion, which wasn't a decision that I made lightly. Knowing that I couldn't ask my dad for help, I ended up turning to my ex's stepmom, who helped me get temporary health insurance and brought me to all of my appointments. During the 4-hour drive to the clinic to get the procedure done, my ex sat in the passenger seat of his stepmom's Blazer, while I sat directly behind him, nervously staring out the window. He turned his head past the seatbelt and whispered to me, "I can't wait until this is over with so I never have to speak to you again." Not only did his words cut me deep, but the abortion itself ended up being extremely traumatizing and weighed heavily on me into my early 30s. The following day, we went back to school and my ex ended up telling everyone that he knew that I got an abortion. Then all of those kids told everyone that they knew, and by the end of the day, almost the entire school, including the teachers, knew what happened. I was already bullied pretty badly back then, and having that information leak throughout the school made my life so much worse. One day, as I took my seat in health class, a girl stood up a few rows behind me and berated me in front of the entire class, including the teacher. She told me that God hated me, called me a murderer, and told me that I was going to hell. Everyone just stared at me, and literally no one said a word or stood up for me. I had absolutely no backbone back then, so I just sat there frozen. As soon as she was finished yelling at me, she just sat down and the teacher started class as if nothing happened. I couldn't even walk through the hallways between classes without being harassed. People, mostly girls, even went as far as making up fake screen names on AIM, threatening to take my life and telling me to go kill myself. I don't think most people understand the effects that their words and actions have on others, nor do they understand the sheer gravity of making such a huge decision that weighs heavy on a person's conscience. All of these instances drove me further and further to get fucked up at every possible moment in order to try and escape the pain that I was carrying. The only person who offered to help me was my teacher, Mrs. Campbell. She was my favorite teacher, and I knew that I could trust her, but I had been drowning in so much guilt by that point that I felt too ashamed to talk to her. Looking back now, I definitely wish that I would have. I spent every single weekend at parties and eventually started smoking cigars since I had built such a high tolerance for alcohol and weed to the point that they no longer hit the same. And as if that wasn't enough, about a week before senior year started, I wound up trying chewing tobacco at a party, despite one of my friends advising me not to do it, knowing that it was highly addictive. I was so sick of being told what to do by then that I tried it anyway and instantly got hooked. My addictions only got worse as my senior year went on. My ex-boyfriend used my empathic nature against me and kept attempting to commit suicide through pill overdoses, trying to get me back into a relationship with him when all I wanted was to be left alone after everything that he put me through. Eventually, he got sent away to some rehab center, and just when I thought that I was finally free, he returned home and I somehow got stuck being his tutor. His parents were never home after school, and there were a couple of occasions where I was forced to do things with him against my own will, so I ended up dating someone else just so I could get away from him. Between this experience and my childhood upbringing, my bar for relationships was set extremely low. In fact, it wasn't even a bar. It was a line in the sand that could easily disappear if the wind blew just right. And because of these unresolved traumas, my addictions became my perceived safety blanket, one that I clutched onto for dear life well into adulthood.
I've left my soul far behind.
Throughout my late teens into my early 20s, I was surrounded by people who all had their own fair share of addictions, so it was easier for me to normalize the reckless decisions that I was making. It wasn't until my mid-20s, as my life shifted and my friend groups changed, that I started to closet my addiction to chewing tobacco since there was such a huge stigma around women using it. However, as I approached my late 20s, the weight of carrying such a deep dark secret began to eat away at me. In the back of my mind, I always knew that I had a problem, yet I convinced myself that I was doing everyone else a favor by keeping it to myself. In reality, I was doing myself a major disservice due to the incredible amount of shame and guilt that I was holding onto by hiding it away from the people that I loved. Not to mention the fact that by keeping such a heavy secret, no one truly knew the real me, which made me feel even more alone and perpetuated my dependency on using substances to numb the very pain that I was trying to run away from. I wasn't in control of my addictions. They were in control of me. The vicious cycle of constantly needing to top up on my addictions really drove a wedge between myself and those closest to me. Rather than being present with the people in my life, I'd constantly be thinking about how I couldn't wait to be alone so that I could finally indulge again. Sometimes I would even start fights with past partners that I had chewing from in order to finally be alone. And I would even put my own life in danger by going for long drives in blizzards just so I could get my fix. As soon as I staved the cravings, the only feeling left was shame. My addictions were ruining my life. It made it completely impossible for me to focus on anything else. I knew deep down on some level that I was slowly killing myself. I'd ride the proverbial merry-go-round of constantly telling myself that this would be the last time, only to break the promise I made to myself an hour later when the cravings reared their head once more. And any time I actually did quit for a few days or even a couple of weeks, I'd convince myself that since I reached a certain milestone that I deserved a reward and would treat myself with the very substance that I was quitting. I would tell myself that one more beer, dip, cigar, or bowl won't hurt. I'm in control now, only to find myself restarting the same cycle, waiting to quit all over again. Every time I didn't follow through on letting my addictions go, I'd feel worse and worse about myself and my situation. Because every time I broke the promises I made to myself, I would lose trust in myself, essentially deteriorating the confidence I already lacked back then. It was debilitating to say the least. This went on for several years, until eventually one day in February of 2019, when my dentist told me that I needed to quit chewing tobacco immediately, otherwise I was going to lose my teeth. That was the day that I always dreaded, yet desperately needed, in order to finally make a change. I wish I could say that dentist visit was enough to scare me into letting go of my addictions all at once, but that was not the case. In fact, rock bottom and I became pretty well acquainted over the next handful of years. Anytime I became too comfortable in the familiar pain, I would purposely push myself to the point of no return in order to force myself into finally changing.
So find me a place to grow, a place to roam, a place to go home. This road is paved with gold, but the view is getting old. My heart is turning cold. They say all roads lead to Rome. Lead me home. Lead me home.
As I received the news of the possibility of losing my teeth, my dentist suggested that I switch to pouches in order to wean myself off of chewing tobacco. And at that point in time, I had been chewing about a tin a day. Now, you would think that this news would be enough for me to just quit that day, but it wasn't. And so when I got home, I actually ended up researching all the ingredients in chewing tobacco in order to basically scare myself. And I did. Essentially, chewing tobacco has over 30 carcinogens in it, including car battery acid. As soon as I was done with that, I decided, let's look up some photos of the ramifications of long-term use of chewing tobacco. And let me tell you that the images were absolutely horrifying. So much so to the point that I literally had nightmares about it for weeks until I finally quit on March 19th, 2019, after 12 and a half years of use. In order to essentially make sure that I never picked up another tin again, hard candies and sunflower seeds ended up becoming my new best friends. And since my mood was so erratic, I ended up hitting the gym every day for hours on end in order to work through all the anxiety that was coming up from the withdrawals. Now, I wound up being clean completely from all tobacco products for about 2 months. It wasn't until I went camping with the ex that I had shared in chapter 7 that I ended up picking up cigars again. He ended up bringing a Black and Mild with him, and I took a couple hits after having a few beers. The following day, I ended up picking up more cigars, and I basically just convinced myself that it wasn't as bad as chewing tobacco, which obviously I was lying to myself. I ended up spending the following 3 years struggling to let go of cigars. Every single time I would smoke a cigar, I would already be worrying about the next time I was going to smoke one again. And every single time I started running low, I would be worrying about when I was going to go get more. It literally occupied my brain 24/7, despite the fact that every single time I smoked, I felt nauseous, tired, heavy, and I would constantly be coughing stuff up. It literally felt like I was dying a slow death. Eventually, I came across a book called The Easy Way to Quit Smoking by Alan Carr, and it was an extremely helpful book. One of the most pertinent things that he had stated in that book is that no matter how many times you have just one more cigarette, you're always going to want another and another and another. And this is 1,000% true. Every single time I quit smoking and something stressed me out, I would convince myself to pick up a tiny little 2-pack and, that's all I need, just a couple little smokes and then I'm good to go. But instead, I would always just restart the cycle, even though I had been clean for a couple of weeks at that point, and it was just the most infuriating thing ever. I ended up reading that book from front to back literally 6 times in a row in order to drill it into my head that I needed to quit smoking. Another thing that I did was I actually watched a Mind movie called I Am Smoke Free, both of which are going to be linked below in the description box if you'd like to check those out. Essentially to help myself rewire my brain and to change my mindset around smoking. Over time, I ended up adopting the mindset that it was actually easy for me to quit. And I basically affirmed to myself that I was a non-smoker until I eventually did quit on May 24th, 2022. I will never forget that date because honestly, nicotine had such a strong hold on me that I never thought in a million years I would ever be able to quit.
I wrote in my journal, I am so grateful for finally taking the leap of faith and trusting where I'm being guided to go, for finally releasing myself from the shackles of my past. I am free. It really just takes a choice to respect yourself and to love yourself and to do what feels best even if it's not what you want. But doing what's best feels so much better.
I also downloaded an app called I Am Sober, which was extremely helpful in me staying clean. Every morning I would log on, I would make my daily pledge, and just seeing how many days I had been clean and the amount of money that I was saving really helped me to stay accountable. And anytime I actually felt like I was going to slip up, I would just hop on the app, read other people's stories, and basically feel immediate reassurance that I was going to be okay without it. I also threw out the tiny purse that I used to keep my cigars in, as well as rearranging my furniture in order to basically eliminate the spot that my cigars used to be in. And it was actually super helpful. It helped me change up the energy of my space, and I even started adopting new, healthier habits. The only downside to this period of my life was the fact that I ended up smoking way more weed than usual. I was basically high 24/7, and it was to the point where after the first few weeks, I ended up quitting weed as well because I just literally couldn't stand being high anymore. I was completely sober from all substances for about 2 months after I was sick of smoking weed. I had actually quit drinking at the beginning of January of that same year. I didn't end up picking another drink back up until the end of August after I was in Washington for a few weeks. It started off pretty slow, where I was just having an IPA here and there at some of the local microbreweries in Spokane, until eventually it snowballed into drinking pretty much every night, just like I had before. And to top that off, the streets always smelled like weed there, and eventually I hopped back on that bandwagon in the middle of September. I really thought that I had everything under control until eventually Cody and I had our rough patch in the spring of 2023. And at that point, I was basically just running away from all of my emotions and was getting blackout drunk every single night. The last time I got drunk, I ended up going to bed at 6 p.m. and woke up the following morning and decided right then and there that I was done drinking. I am about a beer and a half deep, like all day tall boys. And smoked a bit of a bowl, and it's not as appealing and appetizing as my ego likes to make it. When I have those moments throughout the day thinking that I need to hurry up and go get booze, I don't need it. I don't need it. I don't need any of it. I actually am really looking forward to intentional stillness and being with myself and not running away anymore. I'm pretty buzzed right now, but I just literally feel hungry, tired, a little thirsty. Yeah, so just wanted to record that really quick. I honestly didn't know what to do with myself once I quit drinking. In order to not relapse, I made it a point to try to keep my evenings as normal as possible, but just obviously not drink alcohol. And so essentially every night I would make myself a fancy drink, which is literally just lemonade with a salted rim. And I also made it a non-negotiable to dance every night, since that's what I was already doing, but now I was doing it all sober. It ended up being extremely helpful, and it's still something that I look forward to doing most evenings. Weed became the final crutch that I stood on for the following year. Even though I didn't use it nearly as much as my other addictions, it was still something that was negatively affecting my mental health. Weed basically went from something that I found to be fun and enjoyable to something that just made me feel really paranoid and anxious all the time. I used to associate smoking weed with creativity, but honestly, the longer I used it, the more my creativity suffered from it. And so basically, every single time I smoked weed, I would end up criticizing and judging all of my creative projects and even second guessing all of my life choices. I also noticed that if I was already in a bad mood and then I smoked, it would actually make me even angrier, and then I would get stuck in ruminating thoughts and basically waste all of my energy thinking about stuff that wasn't helping me move forward in life. Eventually, I started listening to other people's stories on YouTube and recognized that I was experiencing pretty much the same thing as them. And so hearing their journey and their experience in quitting weed helped me to feel more confident in letting it go myself. I didn't actually replace weed with anything other than basically just working on this Diaries of a Black Sheep series, and I did eat a few too many dark chocolate sea salt caramel candies, which I still eat most days. Since becoming sober, I did eventually test the waters just to see how far I've come. And so after my 14-month mark of being sober, I did try an IPA again, and what I realized is that I don't actually like feeling buzzed. Like, I don't like the way alcohol makes my body feel. And as for weed, I did also test the waters with that towards the end of this past summer, just to kind of get an idea of where I stood with weed, and I basically had the exact same results as alcohol. And after just a hit of a joint, I realized I don't like being high. I was very paranoid and anxious the entire time, and then basically the rest of my day was shot. Like, I didn't feel like myself again. It just helped me to see that those aren't things that I actually want in my life anymore, and that I actually really love being sober. Like, I can see myself, having a drink maybe once every 6 months to a year, where it's like, it happens to be a special occasion, or maybe I'm at a concert and somebody passes me a joint. I might take a hit of it. But as far as it being a daily usage thing or regular usage, absolutely not. Like, I'm not inviting anything like that into my life again. It's actually pretty wild to look back on all of this, because for the longest time, I never actually thought that I would ever become sober. Like, I always fantasized about becoming sober one day, but I used to think that there was going to be some sort of like big external event that took place that actually made me quit, like maybe getting married or having kids. And so to be where I am now, I can confidently say that in order to become sober, you have to want it for yourself. Nobody can convince you to do it. You can't convince someone else to do it, to become sober themselves. It has to be something where you become so sick of the reality that you created for yourself that you finally become sober. I feel like addiction is widely misunderstood. Just as I shared at the beginning of this video, addiction isn't the problem. It's a symptom of unresolved trauma. It's not that an addict is inherently bad, troubled, or an incompetent person. Underneath all of those addictions is a person carrying the pain of unhealed emotional wounds. It's a person that is in need of understanding and support as they heal through their painful past experiences in order to develop a more loving relationship with themselves to finally let their addictions go. Of course, not everyone is ready or even willing to face themselves to the degree in which they finally heal themselves and become sober. But many people are suffering in silence, wishing for a better life, but just don't know how to go about it or where to even start. For me, one of the biggest factors that contributed to becoming an addict was an immense feeling of unworthiness. My whole life, I was conditioned by everyone around me, especially my parents, to feel like I was a massive burden and that my existence took up too much space. As a highly sensitive person who's always felt things on an extremely deep level, the overwhelm of my feelings constantly being invalidated as a child and teenager eventually led me to abandoning myself. Indulging in addictions was the only thing that brought me an immediate sense of relief from all the stressful feelings that I didn't know how to deal with, and gave me a false sense of control and being able to shut them off whenever I wanted. Since becoming sober, I've learned that when we shut off the bad feelings, we also shut off the good. Life isn't meant to feel comfortable 100% of the time, despite the fact that our society has been built upon comfort, leisure, and instant gratification. We're always being served some new product, service, or pill that's supposed to make us feel better. But it's in the moments of being with our discomfort that make the contrasting moments of happiness and peace all that more sweet. Wherever you go, there you are. I've learned that you can try to escape your state of mind through substances or any other dopamine-inducing activity, but no matter where you run to, physically or psychologically, there you are. I spent nearly 20 years believing that my addictions were making me feel better, when in fact they were actually making me feel much worse. All I was really doing was prolonging feeling my pain for a later date, while simultaneously stifling my ability to experience the peace and fulfillment that I desired all along. Addiction runs on both sides of my family, and what I've learned through this experience is that there is no such thing as having an addictive personality. It's just avoidance of problems and anything that brings us pain or discomfort. I've watched the people around me completely destroy their lives and relationships simply because they were never taught healthy self-soothing skills. Having suffered long enough through my own version of hell that I created for myself, I decided that addiction ends with me, as I refuse to pass that generational pattern down to my future children. In order for me to finally let go of each of my addictions, I had to learn how to regulate my nervous system whenever I was feeling triggered or stressed. I slowly practiced tolerating new levels of discomfort for small increments of time until I finally felt comfortable enough to no longer reach for substances in order to escape my feelings. One of, if not the most important factors that's helped me to stay sober is through reparenting my inner child. If you've never heard of this concept before, it's essentially showing up for yourself in all the ways that your parents or caregivers didn't show up for you when you were growing up. This is a very key component in healing through unresolved trauma and subconscious beliefs from your past that drive you to remain addicted. One way that's made it easier for me to show up for myself in this new way has been by imagining my inner child as if she were my own daughter and making healthier choices on her behalf that most benefit her and her future. Maintaining differentiation between my inner child and inner adult has been paramount in me actually overcoming the things that I've been most afraid of. Reparenting your inner child will look different for everyone, depending on your own personal experiences. For me, reparenting my inner child has been a journey of feeling through old emotions that were left over from traumatic experiences of my past. This process has allowed me to heal by letting go of old emotions and gaining new perspectives surrounding those experiences. This in turn has slowly shifted my beliefs about myself and the world around me. Rather than feeling like someone who is unworthy of taking up space and like I had to overcompensate to justify my existence, I now recognize my inherent worth that's been here all along, despite the way that I was treated throughout the first 30-something years of my life. As my beliefs have changed over the years, so have my habits and the way that I show up to life. I used to constantly put things off for later. The stress of things piling up would trigger me into using substances in order to escape my reality. Now, I make it a point to stay on top of my responsibilities, which not only helps me to feel supported and nurtured, but it also gives me plenty of mental and emotional space to actually enjoy my life more deeply. I've opted for a more regimented lifestyle to further support my inner child by maintaining a healthy sleep schedule, meal prepping instead of opting for junk food, and planning out my week ahead every Sunday morning. Having so much structure might sound super boring and restricting, but it's actually brought me an immense amount of freedom to focus on the things that I actually want to do with the rest of my time and energy. Building this level of discipline has also helped me to heal my abandonment wounds because I'm no longer abandoning myself. I started setting healthier boundaries around my time and energy, I stopped giving it away to people who weren't reciprocating, and I stopped hanging around people who were still partaking in the things that I finally quit in order to ensure that I didn't pick up any of my old vices again. I started seeing the value within myself and finally put my own needs, desires, and emotional experience first instead of last. Showing up for myself in these simple yet effective ways while keeping the promises I make to myself has actually boosted my confidence and trust in myself tremendously. Cultivating such a deep level of self-respect has made it so much easier for me to consistently take inspired action towards my goals and setting myself up for a brighter future. It wasn't until I finally quit all of my addictions that I truly started living my life. I've come to learn that true freedom comes from not depending on anything outside of yourself to make it through each day. Now, as long as my basic needs are met, I feel unstoppable in reaching my fullest potential. It's been a long journey of hard internal work, but I've truly come to love the person that I am today. If you feel like one or many addictions are holding you back and you're ready to quit, or if you're already on your journey to recovery, be sure to give yourself plenty of grace during this process. As humans, we don't always learn our lesson the first time, so don't shame yourself if you slip up and get back into temptation. It can be easy to beat yourself up, but that will only keep you trapped in cycles of shame, leading you to want to check out and escape your feelings even more. The best thing you can do for yourself is acknowledge that you've made a mistake by picking the vice back up and recognize any underlying feelings of disappointment. Reassure yourself that you still love and respect yourself regardless of the situation, and tell yourself that it's okay to try quitting again tomorrow. As long as you keep on trying, over time you'll feel less and less like you're letting yourself down and start seeing becoming sober as a journey that it truly is, rather than a one-off event. If you find yourself relating to my story, hopefully you feel less alone in your struggle in overcoming your own addictions. It's not easy letting go, but you do have the strength and ability to overcome anything that you set your mind to. You just have to want it bad enough. If you feel like your motivation to quit isn't quite strong enough to spring you into action, ask yourself the following questions. What does your future look like in a year from now if you keep this addiction in your life, and how does that make you feel? Then ask yourself, what does your life look like in a year from now if you do finally quit, and how does that make you feel? Recognizing the consequences of our actions instead of keeping our head buried in the sand will really make it obvious just how much our addictions are actually holding us back, and acknowledge all of the unlimited possibilities available to us on the other side of quitting. Once you've done that, get clear on why you want to quit. Write it down on a post-it note and stick it somewhere you'll see several times a day, every day, until you finally quit for good. Having that subconscious reminder, even if you're not directly reading it, will help anchor you to your original intention, even if it takes you a while to let your vices go. And just a little side note, if you're letting go of multiple things, don't quit them all at the same time. As humans, we're creatures of comfort, so too much change all at once could result in relapsing. Figure out which one feels most doable and start there. You'll naturally feel more inclined to let the more difficult ones go once you have a little momentum under your belt from quitting the easier ones. No matter what led you to your addictions, your past does not define you. You can heal and overcome anything that you put your mind to. Don't let your attachment to what's comfortable and familiar be the reason that you hold yourself back from experiencing true freedom. I'm sending you so much love and reassurance on your journey to sobriety. If anyone can overcome the impossible, it's you.